Hello everyone, today on the 5-part series of Being Extraordinary, we're going to talk about the role of fear. Hello everyone, we discuss it regularly, the role of fear in our lives, that false evidence appearing real that quite often stops us from living the most fun, authentic version of ourselves and being what we really need to be in order to get better. So as always, I'm going to begin with a quote on the subject, and that quote is, "If you want to grow and develop yourself, embrace failure. If you want to become the best at what you do, you've got to be willing to fail again and again. And then finally, one day you can fail your way to greatness." Les Brown. Les Brown is someone that I've talked about regularly. He's an inspiration, someone who was born into an orphanage, was adopted, was labelled as mentally retarded as a child, and went on to make hundreds of millions of dollars as a public speaker and working for Fortune 500 companies. But the money wasn't the thing that really motivated Les. The thing that motivated him was taking that fear of not being good enough, and moving forward and breaking through those fears. And that's what exhilaration is. Exhilaration requires fear. You know those amazing passionate feelings you have? That because the barrier of fear gets smashed through. Therefore fear is really important, because we want to feel exhilarated, we want to feel great, we want to feel proud of ourselves. So therefore fear is a really important thing to have in our lives. And ultimately there's only two fears that humans carry: the fear of not being enough and the fear of not being loved. And when we can break through those two fears, and the easiest way to break through those fears is to understand that self-love is the only love and you are already enough, you can move forward and start to achieve some incredible things in your life. So a personal story that reminds me of this situation was, I remember being in a room for a large corporation in Australia, and the room was full of people much more senior than me. I was sort of like a mid-level guy, if you will, and an opportunity came to do a live demonstration of Windows 7, which was the biggest software launch of its time, and Australia was the first time zone that would be selling copies of Windows. So globally it was a big deal. So the first copy of Windows 7 ever to be sold in Australia. So there wanted to be a live build-up of the event, some demonstration of the software. Bill Gates was going to Skype into the store as the first copy was sold, and the chairman turned around, looked around and said, "Who would like to do the live demonstration of this software?" Now, one thing that people know in television is that live is tough, but software is tough. And you don't even want to demonstrate software, on a recording, because it takes so long, because it always goes wrong, let alone do it live on TV where you can get roasted. And I found my hand going up and being the only person who offered to do that, but being absolutely scared, ridiculously scared, knowing that it could be an absolute failure, disaster, and it all falls apart. And just that moment that my hand went up was the moment that passion and exhilaration came into my life, because choosing fear. So let's look at how this works in our day-to-day lives, and let's look at how we can become extraordinary by conquering this fear. So, modelling of reality. We have a thin sliver of reality, and we can't take in all the information around us, so we model it. We see the world based on our models. So ultimately, we have a huge responsibility individually to choose models that serve us and those around us. There's no right or wrong model, because we're not even getting the whole totality of reality. We're ignoring 98% of visible light. We don't see 98% of the things in front of us. It's crazy, right? We don't see it. Like I always say, dogs don't have the cones in their eyes to see a rainbow, and if you try to explain a rainbow to a dog would think you were crazy. And your modelling of reality is really important, and your modelling of reality should incorporate fear as simply an opportunity or a hurdle to jump as you get better. But if you model fear on something that creates anxiety and pain, that model will continue to live out. Number 2, removing judgments of others, and self-judgment will die. What are we really scared of? Remember the only two fears that exist: one, that you're not enough, and 2, that you'll never be loved, or you won't be loved. How do you do that? You stop judging others for those same things. When we see someone who maybe isn't, in the best physical health, or maybe stresses out or has a negative attitude, when we judge them, we remove the opportunity to figure ourselves, and ultimately that critical muscle that we're building, that muscle of judgment, turns on us to judge us. 3, cynics and critics do not create. The internet seems to be full of people who make a career on bad-mouthing each other, and the feuds and the celebrity feuds and things like this. That's great, but every second they spent in critical mode is an opportunity they could have been using to create. And cynics do not create. It's the easiest job in the world to be a critic and a cynic. It's the hardest job in the world to get out in front of those cynics and critics who feel their job it is to knock you down and still stand there with pride and push through your own personal barriers. They're stuck in the box of cynicism. You don't have to be. 3, what's the worst can happen? And why does that matter, really? Like, what is the worst that happen? Could the worst that happen is that people think you're an idiot? That's a risk I take every time I make a video. And let's say that does happen. Let's say people think I'm an idiot. Does that really matter? Like, how can that affect me? The only power I could have for that to affect me is the power I give to other people to control how I see myself. And the reality is I see myself as those people, as the sky, as the mountains, as their criticism. So I am not living, I am life, I am all those things. Therefore, it can't hurt me. It can only be part of me. Fear strengthens you if you let it. Once again, we create a modality, a model of the world, and if you have a model where fear strengthens you, it does. It really does propel you. It's like almost like Lego blocks. You keep building Lego on top of each other, keep getting higher and higher. Every time you overcome a fear, you become better. And if you don't think that's true, just think about how frightening it would have been for your first time getting into water. I could imagine as a child getting into water and being like, what is this? Can I breathe? Can I drown? And knowing that fear was completely ridiculous. And now I love swimming. However, if I was to get into water and to say this fear is real, which it's not, it's just a chemical cascade which you can control, I never would be swimming. I'd be missing out on all the amazing adventures I have swimming to islands, meeting incredible people at the beach, or more, even better, meeting incredible dolphins in the wild. False evidence appearing real. You'll hear me say this all the time. That's what fear stands for. False evidence appearing real. It doesn't mean that it can't hurt you. It doesn't mean it can't stress you. It doesn't mean it's not something very important to you, but it's false evidence appearing real. And how do I know it's false? Because you're interpreting it before the event, and your interpretation of a situation before the event is always wrong, because the event is reality, therefore the event is right. Think about your previous fears. Have a think about your relationship fears, your work fears. Think about all these fears that you've had in the past that you've overcome. And the only reason you understand those fears to be less than your current fears is because you've overcome them with perspective. So maybe take some perspective on your current fears, fast forward yourself a few years into the future when you've overcome them, and actually treat them like they're already overcome right now, and they'll start to lose their strength. Sit with the fear. Fear, you can't just magically make fear go away. We've been conditioned by media, shouting adverts that are saying we're going to miss out on the latest iPod if you don't get in quick. So we live in a fearful, stressful society that's been accelerated through stimulants like coffee, insert. We know this by now, right? We're up to 300 odd in our videos, we know this. So when it comes, sit with it. Build the muscle to deal with the fear. Do not use avoidance strategies. What you repress manifests. Do not pick up the phone when you're feeling a bit anxious. Do not, daydream. Sit with it, and you'll realize very quickly it has such a limited lifespan. The fear can't stick around. Chemically, it can't even stick around. It requires the steam-powered motion of your thought. Just sit with it and allow it to go. Think about the fear that you're currently having from the perspective of your deathbed. How much will it really worry you to pick up the phone and have that conversation when you're on your deathbed? You'll see that it's such a blip on the radar, it's not even important. Treat every day like it's your last day, and you'll find it much easier, because dealing with the fear of death, once you've done that, all other fears pale into insignificance. And finally, waterfalls. I heard it explained to me once that fear is just like a waterfall. When you first see a waterfall, you can imagine showing someone who'd never seen a waterfall before a waterfall, and you could picture it. I know as a child I sort of had this imagery as well. It looks solid. That curtain of water, you can't see through it, so you think it's solid. And as you walk up to it, you can notice that it's made of water, but still you can't see through to the other end. And then as you put your hand into it, you realise your hand's gone through the waterfall, and then you step through the waterfall. And what inevitably happens, you're generally on the other side of the waterfall, and when you see it through the water, it's incredibly beautiful. And that's what fear is. Fear is that waterfall. It looks so solid, but it's just a curtain of nothing. And when you walk through it, that's where your invigoration comes from. Don't let fear hold you back. Become the master of fear and use it to drive you forward. It's definitely something to think about, and I can't wait to see you tomorrow. Until then, goodbye.